This is Only the Strong Survive, a podcast powered by Con Media, where we dive deep into the world of business, leadership, and innovation. I'm your host, Dan Con, and I'm honored to have you join us today. So let's get ready to learn some survival skills together. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Only the Strong Survive. I'm your host, Dan Con, and we have a great episode for you today. With us today is Vince Finaldi. You may have heard his name. You may not have heard his name, but Vince is an accomplished businessman. He has run an accomplished restoration shop and has now taken over and is in the process of assuming the role of chair of Pebble Beach and the Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegance. So, by the time you hear this, we'll be just a week or two out from probably arguably the most famous car show in the world. And Vince will be taking the reins and is in the process of taking the reins. And we're going to hear all about what it's like to take on a leadership of such a legendary and well-respected institution. So Vince, first of all, thank you for joining us on Only the Strong Survive.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Vince, tell us a little more about your background. So I know that you're joining Pebble as president, and that you, obviously the timing of all this is kind of amazing. 75th anniversary this year. Sandra, who's led the organization for what? Is this her 40th year?
She's been with it for 40 years.
40 years. Yeah, that's unbelievable. I mean, for anyone to have any kind of a run like that in one organization is incredible. Mm-hmm. And before that, I think you were a Marine, right? And also a litigator. So you've had a heck of a career arc for a guy who's still pretty young. So tell us a little bit about kind of the beginning. You have car guy genes going back many generations, right? So tell us about the beginning. How did you kind of come to be a car guy, and how did you come into this whole world?
Sure. So my grandfather on my father's side is Italian. And from a young age, he was always going back and forth between the U.S. and Italy. Eventually ended up working in the automotive sector for GM. And this is way back in the early 20s. Ended up coming back to Italy, opened up an automotive trucking shop. And that's where his sons eventually worked with him, one of them being my father. So then my father and uncles eventually moved to the U.S. in the late 60s. And they opened their own automotive shops, body shops, collision repair, mechanic shops, first in Chicago area. Then they moved out to Southern California and opened various shops. So I kind of grew up in the business. I was just always around cars and immersed in them. And that's really where I wanted to be when I was young. So they're involved in repairing cars and also importing and exporting, mainly Italian sports cars, but all sports cars from Europe.
So when you're growing up, what does that mean? That means you're being exposed to what? I guess like Ferraris, Lambos. Yeah,
you name it. Any kind of cars. They generally would purchase and import and export cars that they liked, So and we're familiar with Alfa Romeo, Ferrari, Lamborghini, Maserati. So I'd come home from school and there'd be a Lamborghini in the garage, and of course I'd get in it and play with it and fall in love with it, and say this is my car, and then I'd come home from school the next day and the car would be gone, and I'd cry and say what happened here? Where'd the car go? And Dad said, well, it got sold.
Did you know then that was unusual?
No, I thought it was normal.
Okay.
My friends would come and always look in the garage, and sometimes their parents would come by and they'd my dad would wake us up in the morning on the weekends and say, let's go for a drive. So we'd get in a sports car with him, and we'd open up the garage and there'd be, people outside of there just watching. And for me, that was normal. But now looking back on it, I think, it's probably a little bit different seeing a, Lamborghini Miura pull out of the garage of a normal suburb in Southern California and move at a spirited pace down the street.
What neighborhood did you grow up in? What area in SoCal?
I grew up right on the border of Riverside and Orange counties at a place called Corona, which was all orange groves at the time. It was very agrarian, not how it is now.
It's funny how those kind of things leave an impression. I think the first time I emailed you or reached out to you, I talked about my first Pebble experience and Monterey experience was with a high school buddy. Well, my high school buddy, his dad, as a guy, he's passed away years ago now, named Tony Gerasi, who was a pretty well-respected Porsche restorer and mechanic. And he had an experience like you. No, I didn't. I had kind of one degree of separation, but being buddies with Marco, his son, there was always like a 930 or something in the garage, and we would frequently steal those cars when we were teenagers.
Yeah.
And go out and drive them. And like that left such an impression on me. And I know it left an impression on him that it's kind of hard not to become a car guy when you're exposed to that kind of stuff, So that's how cool. So, okay. So you grew up in kind of in the business. Now, because of your heritage, was it always like, for you, was it always like Italian cars or nothing? Or did you sort of go through the normal high school muscle car, SoCal arc?
Yeah. Well, when my father moved here initially, he lived in Chicago, and that's where his first shop was. So, the muscle cars were huge in the late 60s and early 70s. And he was fairly heavy into Corvettes as well. He raced C2 Corvettes, and he did a lot of drag racing all around the area there. And later, ended up restoring, quite a few of them. I think he's owned over 100 of them. So, we were doing muscle cars as well, but, the Italian and the European car niche at the time, there weren't a lot of mechanics that knew how to tune the engines, because the engines are a little bit different. They got Weber carburetors. They're very tunable. They're great if you know how to work on them. But if you don't know how to work on them, you don't know how to synchronize the carburetors and adjust them, then, your car's not going to run well. So they kind of got a name for themselves by being able to tune these cars. And that became, part of their business. It's not that I, was into Italian cars because I'm Italian. It's just that, my dad was Italian, my uncles were Italian. That's what they're exposed to. That's what they knew, and that's what they kind of specialized in. So, from a very young age, these are the cars that I was familiar with.
That's really cool. So growing up, with you kind of immersed in this, did you see yourself going into the business, or was this like a thing that just your family did?
Yeah, kind of. I really liked the military since the time I was young. I was in Civil Air Patrol as a kid, and always kind of wanted to serve in the military in some respect. I had an uncle that was in the intelligence, industry, and I kind of wanted to maybe do that. But I also love cars. I was always involved in cars. I always wanted to be at the shop anytime I had free time. I didn't want to be out playing soccer or doing those things. I wanted to be wrenching on cars and having fun with them. So when I was younger, I was trying to figure out exactly what it is I wanted to do. And my father, said that, look, you do really well in school. You've got an opportunity in academics that a lot of people don't have. You should kind of lean into that. And cars are always going to be here. They're always going to be a part of your life. But see where your education takes you and kind of go from there. I thought that was good advice, and I did follow it. So after high school, I went into the Marine Corps in infantry. And so I served as an infantryman for 4 years, got to GI Bill. And then after that, I went and continued my education. I went to college, ended up graduating from UC Berkeley. And then I ended up meeting someone who was in law school. He was one of my roommates. And he was going through courses to be an attorney. And, I never knew any lawyers growing up. Never knew a single one. But I thought it was interesting, the work he was doing, the coursework, much more interesting than some of the chemistry and math work that I was working on. And so I decided to take some courses, and that, rolled in more courses and more courses. And I learned that my brain kind of works how a lawyer's brain works. And it was something that wasn't really difficult work for me. So that's kind of how I fell into the lawyering world.
Going back a step, Vince, when you were in the Corps, where were you stationed after basic?
Oh, my primary duty station was lovely, beautiful 29 Palms, California.
Okay, I spent some time out there.
Yeah, I didn't know where it was when I joined. They said, "You're going to 29 Palms." I said, "Oh, well, this sounds great. Palm trees, and I'm picturing a lovely beach." And so we all hop into this big bus. It's about 40 of us, and most of them from the South, from Oklahoma and Kentucky, and they had never been to California. So we get on, we're down by San Diego, and we get in the bus, and I knew the freeways pretty well, and we're heading up the 5 and heading up a little farther, and all of a sudden we make a right turn and we start going inland. And I'm like, uh-oh, this is not by the beach, and we're going more inland. Then all of a sudden the trees go away, and then pretty soon you see the sand, and then more sand, and then nothing, and then just sand. I'm like, uh-oh. this might not be the best duty station
And that's a
in the world.
logistics base, I think, right? Is that
It's a training base. It's a full training base. It's larger than all the other Marine Corps bases put together. Can fit into 29 Palms and still have space left over. It goes all the way out into the desert. And the thing about it is it's one of the few live fire bases where you can fire almost anything there. They can drop ordnance from airplanes there.
Because they have villages and stuff, right? Where you can do training and all that kind of stuff built up
all kinds of stuff. So, some duty stations you get stationed at that are, more near towns now, you can't really train all the time. In 29 Palms, you can train every single day. So we trained every single day, and the duty station we trained for was for the desert.
Okay. Yeah, for those listening who don't know about 29 Palms, you if you're from SoCal, you pass it sometimes on road trips. There's nothing. It's like there's no trees. There's nothing. It's literally just desert. So
it's the place you pass through when you're going from Los Angeles to Las Vegas.
Yeah.
It's the no man's land,
and occasionally a tank. Like that's about it. That's so. Reflecting on your time in the Corps, was there experiences that shaped who you would become as a leader? In later years.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I joined when I was 18 years old. So from a very young age, and actually I started in Civil Air Patrol before that. So I was part of an organization that's run very efficiently. Right. And with a very firm and tight organizational structure and a chain of command. So that's kind of what I always knew from the time I was a kid. And that's carried with me all the way throughout my career. I think it was a good foundation to have. And it's also a good foundation to set for your staff if you're running any type of business.
Very good. That's cool. So from there to Berkeley and then on to law school, and you weren't just a lawyer, you were a litigator, right? So you were the guy like on TV here in the courtroom and arguing and.
Yeah, I was on TV sometimes. I tried not to be, that really wasn't my thing. I didn't like to be a talking head, but from time to time when you're doing cases, especially important ones, you've got to do that. But I was a trial lawyer. I was paid to prepare cases and tell stories, give a voice to people who didn't really have voices. And I found that to be fun, exciting, and meaningful work. A lot of times as a lawyer, you're trained to find the gray areas of law and focus on those. And that's where you develop your practice and make money. I was able to find an area of law where we represented victims of abuse. That, in my opinion, there was not a lot of gray area. It was a black and white area.
Yeah.
If you ask me, and I thought we were on the right side. We were really, really helping people that didn't have a voice and needed it. So it was good work. I was felt fortunate to have been able to do it for as long as I did.
Well, I respect that you're kind of fighting the good fight. And I always thought that trial attorneys, there had to be some element of sort of showmanship in being a trial attorney, because it's not just about the facts, right? It's also about making a case to either a judge or a group of people in a jury box and kind of convincing them to see things a certain way.
Yeah, you can say there's showmanship about it, but if someone's trying to put on a show, that's pretty easy to see through. I mean, you've met people who, are flashy and they're trying to sell you something, and it's, that's the quickest way to turn off a juror or to turn off a person. Generally, what you see is the people who do the best as trial lawyers are engaging, gregarious people who know how to tell stories and know how to connect with people on all kinds of different levels. Those are the people who make the really good trial lawyers, because they can connect with jurors, they can tell a story in a way that makes sense. One of the funny things about practicing law is trial lawyers just end up being that type of person. So you ever get invited to a party with trial lawyers, go to it. You'll have a great time. But the first thing they tell the jury when they're impaneled and you start your case is, the lawyers are going to go into the hallway on the breaks, and you might see them passing by. They're not going to talk to you. They're not going to acknowledge you. They're not allowed to talk to you at all. because we don't want any ex parte communications going on, right? So don't think they're rude. That's just the way it works, right? And never fails. Every single trial I did, there's always a jury. They're kind of drawn to the trial lawyers because you're out there and you're talking, and it's just
and they know who you are, and
yeah, there's just like an attraction to that type of a person, that type of personality, if you will. So it's one of the things you always have to be on guard for as an attorney. Just wave and walk away, but it's an awkward thing. But yeah, it's a personality type, I guess.
So this was one of the questions I was really looking forward to asking you, knowing we had this conversation coming up. Up until this point in your arc, this is almost like a movie or a novel or something, because you're, the son of immigrants, go into the military, use the GI Bill, get a law degree, become a very successful trial attorney. So, everything about that up to this point is like something straight out of a movie, right? Like you've got this like kind of amazing career path. Where things sort of get very interesting for me is like, at what point in all this do you say, what I also really want to do is I also really want to open a restoration shop? Because that is, I think, pretty unusual. So was the original intent to do this alongside the law firm, or was this like a career change?
So I mean, I tell my young staff members and employees and anyone who asks me for advice, they always ask, how did you do this and how did you get there? And that's just such a great plan you had. And I say, that wasn't my plan. I didn't have this plan. I ended up getting here, but I took chances. I took risks. I was presented with something in my life, and it was something that I could either see as an opportunity or as a negative. And I always saw challenges in life and events that occurred to me as opportunities. And I always dove into them head first. And that's kind of how I got to where I am. Cars is something I always did on the side. So, I was always fixing. I'd start with, skateboards, bicycles, go-karts, motorcycles, cars, and then better cars, and then better cars, and then better cars. That was the trajectory of the things that I worked on, fixed, sold, used the money to buy a better one, fixed it, sold it. And I did that throughout my whole life. I did it through my high school years. I did it through my college years. And that's something that I learned from my father and my uncles. And that's something that I always plan to continue doing because I love cars so much. I love the chase. I love finding the car. I love researching cars. I love finding out what makes them work and what makes them tick. I enjoy fixing them. And then after I've kind of had my time with them, I enjoy moving them on and then moving on to the next chase, When I decided to open the shop, so I'd always had thoughts of opening my own shop, from the time I was young. It just never was the right time, if you will. After about 20 years as a trial attorney, especially in this line of work, which is very, very difficult, emotional, gut-wrenching work. I mean, you're working with some people who have had some of the worst things happen to them in their life.
Yeah.
And you're doing it on a daily basis. And this is a 7-day-a-week, 24-hour-a-day job. You don't get any breaks from this type of the emotional part of the job, And when your clients call you, you have to be there for them. It's a difficult area of work. We would lose probably 1 to 2 clients per year to the effects of abuse.
God, that's terrible.
So you compound that by 22 years, and having represented thousands of victims across the U.S. Everyone, not just me, everyone would get to a critical mass where they're just it's time they should move on, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that I didn't care. I always care about my clients and what happened to them. It's just that you get to a point where you've kind of heard the same stories over and over, and it becomes more of a job than a mission, if you will. And that's kind of the point where I had gotten to, where it, because, no one has the bandwidth to care about every single person and every single thing. No one does, And so I felt that I wasn't at my, peak, if you will. And that would be a disservice to the clients and to myself.
So that's when you knew it was time to try something. I've heard police officers say similar things about like after a while when you start to get numb to the stories, that's when you know it's time to...
You're dealing with trauma, heavy duty trauma. It happens with first responders, firemen, policemen, all types of people. And everyone has a different threshold for it. That's one part of it. the other part is that I've always been a highly motivated, achiever. I always set goals for myself. I don't like to sleep. I like to wake up, hit the ground running, and I like to, tick off the boxes every single day of my
Same.
life. That's
Yeah,
how I've been
every
since
day.
I was young. And I felt like I had gotten to the point in that career where I was kind of stagnating. And, in the legal profession, you see it all the time. You walk down the halls and you see the lawyers who didn't have an exit plan and they didn't get out at the right time, right? And they might be in their 50s, they might be in their 60s, they might be in their 70s, but they've got, the back problems, and they've got a heart attack, maybe a stroke, divorce. They've got all these types of problems, maybe substance abuse issues. And I always said that I don't want to be that person. I want to structure my career so I know when I'm at the high and when I'm at the peak, and when I'm ready to move on from it, and I'm going to have a plan to move on to the next. And so that's what I did. I knew it was time for me. I had achieved all the goals I wanted to achieve as a lawyer. We had a great track record of success. We were one of the premier firms in the U.S. doing this. We had changed the laws for the protection of victims to allow them to bring their cases, and we completely changed the legal landscape. And so I felt like my work was done there. And my wife said, "Well, what are you going to do?" My wife's a therapist. One of the smartest moves I did was marrying her. But she said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I don't know. I'll probably just lean into the car stuff." This was during COVID, and then figure it out from there. So we moved up to Carmel, which
I was about to ask. So were you in SoCal at that time with the law firm?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We had just gotten through COVID, and everything was open back up. And before COVID, we had bought a house up in Carmel because we had been going back and forth for years for Car Week, and then just fell in love with the area. And we decided, why don't we just move up there now? It's getting really overbuilt down here in Los Angeles, and things were changing in the Orange County area. And we just wanted to go to a place that was a little slower.
Quieter.
You've been to Carmel. It's like stepping back into time,
Yeah, I love it. I don't love it quite as much during Car Week, but I do love it.
But if you come when it's not Car Week, it's just a different place. It's like going back into the 80s, and that's we said this is where we'd like to raise our kids. So we moved up here. I bought a old dilapidated building, and we restored it and opened an automotive shop there. And so we're restoring cars for quite a bit of time. The shop that I opened, the thought was that we would bring Italian artisans from Italy to here, right? Get them visas, really well trained, metal workers and mechanics, and we'd open up a shop here where if you have an Italian sports car and you want to get it restored, you can have it done here in the U.S. and you wouldn't lose control over the car, and you can watch it getting done, and you can still get it done by the same Italian artisans that built these cars back in the day. So that was the shop that we ran for a number of years. And then things happened with visas and the current administration that made it very difficult for that, because the prices of visas really went through the roof. So that kind of killed that side of the business, unfortunately.
I never thought about that. Yeah, that would be very challenging.
Yeah.
So
especially for a smaller shop. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
For Google, for Microsoft, it's not as big of a problem.
Right. When you're cutting $500 million checks for AI programmers, I guess money is not much of an issue.
I think that was kind of the focus of those, the visa, the changes to the visa programs. But there's always unintended consequences. And so, the small restoration shop that's trying to do really good work, it ended up being one of the unintended consequences of that.
Wow. When you look back on that transition from leading a law firm to moving to Carmel and starting a restoration shop and kind of going from a very kind of current environment and industry to one that's so kind of rooted in history and heritage and craftsmanship, what was the biggest lesson you took from the law firm chapter of your life that you still carry with you today?
I don't know that there's one lesson I can point to. I guess it would be, kind of an amalgam of a bunch of lessons I learned, while working in that field. the thing about, running a restoration shop or any shop where you're dealing with cars that are 30, 40, 50 years old with old wiring, might be cracked, old internals, parts, there's dangers everywhere, right? So you really, really have to be focused on the work that's being done, make sure you're doing high level work, and also responsive to issues as they come up. These cars are not, the $2,000, $3,000 beater you can buy on the side of the street anymore. They're expensive cars. Repairing them is expensive. The parts are difficult to find, and when you do find them, they're expensive. And then they're also valued as art and as investments. So you're not, the landscape of when my father and my uncles used to fix cars back in the 70s has completely changed. Now it's a total different world. It's much more of a science now. And there's pitfalls everywhere. So it's no different than doing legal work. You really got to be on your toes. You have to watch out for what can happen. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. It's the details. Just focus on the details. Mm-hmm. I'm curious. I don't know when you started the shop, are your dad or your uncles still with us or?
Yeah, my father's still around. He's got a shop at his house.
That's great.
A detached shop, and he goes there every single morning. He's 85 years old.
Wow.
And I've got a funny story. The other day, this is about a year ago, he called me. He still goes to his Cars and Coffees, and he's got a newer Corvette, and he's got some older cars, and he said, "Hey, I said, well, how's it going?" He goes, "Well, I'm good. I bought another car." I said, he's at the stage where I'm trying to get them to downsize, right?
I'm right there.
And I'm like, yeah. So he said, "I bought a car." I'm like, "All right, what did you buy?" He goes, "I bought a Pantera." I go, "A Pantera? What, that's not the plan. This is not the, he goes, no, I know. But, I couldn't pass it up. There's this old guy who's been going to Cars and Coffee for years, and it's a great car. And I always told him, look, if you ever want to sell it, let me know. So, the other day we went there and the guy said that I'm too old to drive this thing. I can't use the clutch anymore. And so if you want to buy it, I'll sell it to you. So he said, all right, great. And so he said, I had to buy it. I said,
he's probably younger than your dad.
I said, how old's the guy? He said, 70. I go, well, he's younger than he goes, yeah, but my leg's still good. I could drive the car. So yeah, he's working on that. And, but yeah, I mean, it keeps him busy. It gives him something to do. It keeps him healthy. He's always had a very positive mindset. And I think that's really, really important in terms of being, living a long and healthy life.
Absolutely. Yeah. I have to imagine that it charged him up when you started a shop kind of following in his footsteps. Yeah.
I mean, yes and no. There was parts that he was excited about and he was proud of and he was happy for, but there was the other side that he knew about, which are all the problems that come along with running a shop that he wasn't as excited about, which, you kind of know when you're hanging out in the shop and you're immersed in it, but you really know when you actually own it and you're the person in charge. It's different. Yeah, not as much the payroll stuff. I mean, that's just, that's the same as running any business, but just all the things, a lot of things in a restoration shop are out of your control. A lot of them, especially when you're dealing with very, limited production, rare sports cars that, parts aren't there for. Sometimes you can't find a part. Sometimes you can't find a part to use to prototype the new part. So there's just things that are out of your control. Here's another thing. You've got all these parts that you need. You buy the parts, you get them imported, and you fix the car, and you sell the car. And then 3 days later, let's say 3 weeks later, you get a big bill from customs for tariffs that were imposed later, and you got to deal with that. So there's all kinds of things that have been coming up, lately, especially with new changes in laws that they're curveballs. Talk to any restorer dealing in European sports cars, and they'll tell you the same thing.
Yeah, I've never dealt with anything at the scale you're talking about, but I've got a couple cars, and I also like mid-century furniture, and I've bought a few things online over the last couple of years where I know exactly what you're talking about. You buy something, it shows up, you're happy. Yeah. And then a month later, I get this envelope in the mail, and it's just like tariff bill that I didn't know was coming. And I'm like,
surprise!
Like, wait a second. Like, no one told me about this.
I'm a licensed dealer as well, right? Retail automotive dealer. So I'm always buying and selling cars, and I find something for a good price and I'll get it. So I purchased 3 cars in Germany a couple of years ago, 3 Porsches, vintage Porsches, really nice ones. Imported them, and I put them in a shipping container and floating them here, right? One of the cars I sold before it got into a container, right? The other one sold when it was in a container halfway here, right? I had made the deals on the cars. By the time the cars got here, the tariff bill had hit, right? So after the cars arrived, people didn't know, were we going to get hit with tariffs? Were we not going to get hit with tariffs? And so fast forward 6 months later, I got hit with a tariff bill on 2 of the cars that I had to pay. And this is many $100,000s worth of cars. So it's an unexpected cost that you couldn't really foresee that you got to deal with. So yeah, there's been bumps in the road the entire time. It hasn't been smooth sailing. But that's business, man, and that's life. And if you don't want to deal with those kind of things, you just stay at home and pull the covers over your head and don't get out of bed.
So I'm curious. I know you've had a lot of cars. What was your first car? Like your first car, like when you were 16?
First car, Alfa Romeo GTV.
That's a great car.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, the one I got wasn't. This one was, it was actually not a bad car. It was a 75 4-cylinder. It was owned by the son of a guy named Heinz Heinrich, who was a Porsche broker. Porsche and Alfa Romeo. He was an ex-rally driver, and he lived down the street from us. And so my dad was friends with him. He would buy and sell, Alfa Romeo stuff and all kinds of stuff. But it was his son's car, and it was always parked outside, and we'd drive by, and I was like, love that car. But it was rode hard, put away wet. It was not in the best shape in the world.
Right.
And my dad said, that's the car you want as your first car? I said, yeah. And so we worked a deal, and, I paid for part, and he paid for part, and I think it was $1,500. So over the summer, I got to fix it up, fix up the mechanicals, the engine, the interior, paint the car. Of course I chose black, the hardest color to paint.
Yep.
And so
shows every flaw.
Ended up being a great, beautiful little car. And that was my first car.
What a great gateway drug into sports cars. That's really cool.
I mean, yes and no. My friends, were driving around in Honda Civics or Acuras, and they never had any car problems but me. I'd be like, well, I can't come today because, the car's not running right, or, it won't start, or, the brakes aren't working right, and I got to work on it. And they're like, and then they're working at like pizza shops, right? And and for not the best pay. And I knew how to work on cars and things, and there was a local, mechanic shop. So I was working in a mechanic shop for like twice what they were making,
way more
right?
money.
But they're going to like football games and stuff, and I'm like, no, I got to work, and they'd stop by to see me at work, and I'm covered in grease, and there's all like 30 and 40-year-old men working there, and they're like, yo, man's job, what is this? But I was making a lot more money, so I always kind of just had that mindset,
That's cool. And as you look back at all the cars you've had since, is there one that you owned personally that wasn't just a flip or a client car? Is there one that really stands out? Maybe you still have it, or maybe you sold it and regret selling it, or it just left a real impression on you that is really meaningful?
Well, there's 2 cars. There's the one I regret for purely financial reasons. But there's also the car that really imprinted on me, which was a Lamborghini Miura. My dad had one and owned a couple others when I was young, parked it in the garage, and I just fell in love with this thing. I was probably 6 years old. He would put me and my 2 brothers in the passenger seat and really go for a quick drive. And man, you just hear the carburetors behind your head and the popping and the cracking, the straight cut gears. I mean, that car is so visceral. You could smell it. It was a car that I never forgot, and I always wanted one. So, in my progression of this hobby or this business, whatever you call it, I was always kind of working up towards that car. But man, that elevator only went up. The Miura elevator, the price elevator, only goes in one direction. It's done that for decades because, it's the first supercar. It's an iconic car. And it took me all the way to 2015 to finally get one,
Wow.
Yeah, 30-year chase. And so I found one in Belgium. Not the best car. I went there to go see it. And so I had a friend who knew Valentino Balboni, right, the test driver for Lamborghini. And he said, hey, pay him and he'll go and, meet you there and help you check out the car and test drive it.
Balboni did the walk around with you?
Yeah. So I said, great, let's do it. So I meet him there in Belgium, right, in this area that like farmlands. And he's checking out the car and, we have lunch and he's like, all right, it's great. Let's go for a test drive. I'm like, awesome, let's go. I hop in the passenger seat. We're going spirited pace down these farm roads, 2-lane, 1 lane in each direction. And then a nightmare happened. He pulls over and he looks at me and I go, well, what's up? And he's like, your turn. I'm like, what? He's like, your turn. I'm like, oh my gosh.
The guy who's driven more Lamborghinis than anyone else on earth.
Yeah, I had never driven a Miura in my life, and I heard they're kind of a little difficult, a little finicky. I'm like, oh Lord. So I get out of the car and I'm walking around the front of the car. I'm thinking, oh Lord, don't stall this thing in front of him. I can't do this, Talk about a stage. So I get in it and it like won't really go into first gear, and because I was used to Porsches and just Miura gear changes are notorious for being very heavy, but it's because the linkage and the way it goes through, the back and through the engine.
Well, it's like a weird transverse.
I'm like, it's not really going in. And he goes like, this is the gear shift. He goes, boom, boom, there, like man car, you drive like man. I'm like, oh, great. I'm like, all right, now I really feel worse. I'm like, okay, great, let's go. And I dump the clutch and we haul ass through the farmlands, and I had a great drive. And he's like, "Wonderful, you're a good driver." So it all ended up fine. But
after that, how do you not buy the car? Because
I had to buy the car.
Yeah,
I had
to buy the best
car.
story ever.
Yeah. So I brought it back. I ended up restoring it with a company in Italy, and then sold it through Gooding. We made a world record price on it. We actually found out that this was the Swiss show car in Geneva that was on the stand.
Oh, I remember when that car sold.
Yeah. And then used that money, and I was able to buy 2 cars, 2 Miuras, restored one of them.
Wow.
And sold that one at Gooding. That was a light blue one. Made another world record. And that was a color change car as well. It was originally white, which I did not like for that car. So we changed it to a Azzurro Cielo, which is a Miura color, but it didn't come on that particular car. And then I had another one. And so that's kind of what I've always done, is just kind of, turn things into 1 into 2 and then 2 into 4. And so that's the car that was imprinted on me. It's a very special car in my history. I love them. And the current one I own actually was mid-restoration. And, someone made me an offer I can't refuse, if you will, and he bought it for me mid-restoration. So we're finishing it for him. So, I'm actually...
so is it your shop?
Yeah.
He came in and said, I have to have it.
And I'm finishing it for him. And it's like,
wow.
it's like I'm getting, my wife dressed to go on a date with someone else. It's the weirdest thing. It's not fun. I don't like it.
Yeah.
I don't like it. But, but he's a great guy. He's an ex-military veteran, really wonderful guy, and I'm really happy to be doing work for him. So
that's cool.
I'm fortunate to have really good clients.
What was the one that got away that you kind of referred to?
So the one that got away, it's a Lamborghini Murcielago,
okay,
LP640. Right,
okay.
So it's the
modern era car.
It's the LP640, and it was the manual trans car, right? Of which they only made 20. This one was Verde Ithaca, right? The shiny green color.
Yep.
Green, special green interior. It was owned by Ed Bolian before me, if you know who that is.
Yeah.
And so I bought it. It had 8,000 miles. It was pristine. It was a very good car. But I had that the the mileage anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
at the time I bought it, it wasn't, worth what it's worth now. It was, under 500. So I bought the car and I drove it a little bit and the value was going up. And I got an offer for it for a significant amount more than I had bought it for. And I figured, I don't, it's one of those cars that if you go over 10,000 miles, the value really, really drops, So if you're at 8,500 already, in your mind, you're kind of like, what do I do with this thing? Do I just keep it and sit at my garage and look at it? And that's not who I am. I'm not that type of a person. I like to drive them. I like to use them. I like to work on them. And if it's just sitting in my garage, it's inventory, if you will. I'm just not that kind of person, So I sold it. I figured, hey, I made a good profit. And then fast forward to now, which is not that long, maybe 8 years. And it's, I don't think the guy would take a $2.5 million offer on the car.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I get it.
So that one hurts, but just purely financial reasons. I don't regret the decision. I used the money to, buy another Miura. So at the end of the day, I'm probably still ahead. But I mean, if you're in the car business long enough, you're going to have one or two of those stories, and it's good. I want to be. I always tell people I want to be the old guy that's got a bunch of stories, and he's weathered and he's got scars and he's got. Those are signs of a life well led.
Yeah. Well said. One of the things you're also known for, I think, at least in our little world, is you're known for being a pretty passionate collector, I think, of books, manuals, ephemera.
Mm-hmm.
What is it about the history that seems to fascinate you, and how long have you been kind of collecting all that sort of stuff?
I've loved everything automobile and motorcycle since the time I was born. I just, was drawn to it. I love everything about it. I love the racing. I love the history of the automobile and the motorcycle. The fact that we had, thousands of manufacturers in America at one point in time, and they all have their own histories. And I'd always kind of, stockpiled artifacts and books and posters and things like that because I liked them and I enjoyed them. When I met my wife's from Detroit, and her stepfather's a big collector, and I met him, and he'd been collecting gas and oil signs, porcelain signs, automobilia since the 50s. He had worked at so there's gas stations on the East Coast called City Service, and so he started collecting City Service stuff way back when he was 19 years old, and hasn't stopped to this day. He's still alive. He has a huge collection. And so, this is 20 years ago now. And he told me, start buying gas and oil signs now. They're expensive, but they're going to go up, and do it. So we started doing that together. We'd go to swap meets together, and
that's cool.
We'd buy things on eBay, and that's kind of, one of the ways I connected with him. And that's how I really started to amass a much larger collection. And fast forward to now, this stuff's worth a lot more than it was when I was buying. I don't really buy as much nowadays because the prices are just, some would say insane. But yeah, I enjoy everything about, the car business and, the collector car world. I love it all. Having
been on both sides, so you've been a customer, you've been a collector, you've been sort of the treasure hunter. You own a restoration shop, and we're going to talk about your new role in a minute here. What is the difference between a collector, a true enthusiast? I'm sure you know Bruce Meyer. Bruce talks about how he's very adamant that he says, I'm not a collector, I'm just a caretaker. Leno kind of says similar stuff. So everyone has their own kind of perspective on this. What is it that drives you, and where do you think you fall on that spectrum?
Yeah, that's all just semantics. One person's collector is another one's enthusiast, is another one's curator, is another one's caretaker. I try not to put labels on it. I've been known to be a collector at one point in my life, and I've known to be a curator. I've known to be a caretaker, and I'm not really worried about labeling it. And I don't have time for that. I've got too many things to do. I'm busy finding the cars and having fun with them and moving on to the next one and selling and going on drives with my buddies and enjoying them. And that's what I do. So if someone else wants to label it and they've got a perfect label for it, go right ahead. Call me what
like
you
that.
are. But I if I had to pick a label, I'd just say I'm an enthusiast, a pretty ardent enthusiast. And, but one thing that I'm very, 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 very into is using cars and sharing cars with the world. And that applies not just to cars, it applies to art as well. I don't really see why, certain cars are squirreled away only for a select set of people to see. And the same thing with art. I don't think that great art should be that way. I think the best art should be, shared with the entire world, as long as it can be done so safely and, so the art's not damaged. And I think that's how cars are. I think cars should be used. They should be enjoyed. And I'm a big proponent of not docking cars if there's issues with them that have arisen from normal use.
I like that.
Yeah, you got a little bit of road rash on the car. That's because you took it on the Colorado Grand and you had a great time whipping around with Ferraris and gull wings. By all means, great. Don't dock the car for that.
Well, I love that, and I hope that thought gets sort of imbued into the Concours world, because I think we did go through a period where it felt like things were being almost over restored, and now it does seem like there is sort of a kind of a pivot back to sort of allowing people to actually use these things, like on the tour, for example. To be honest, I love the Concours. I like the cook-off for the tour better. I think that's a more interesting, personally. No, I'm not speaking about for my company or anything, but for me personally, walking around, talking to everybody, hearing them start up, smelling them, that is a more interesting, visceral thing for me.
So yeah, what you just said is exactly what I told the executives of the Pebble Beach Company when we had one of our first meetings. They said, "What's your favorite thing about the concourse?" And I told them it's the tour. I like watching. I would arrive early, like 6 a.m. When it's all fogged over at the equestrian field, and you see the car, the trucks, with the gate comes down, and then the car comes out on it, and it's again lowered through the fog, and the car is started, and there's smoke coming out, billowing out because of the weather, and you see it slowly pull out. And I remember watching Bruce Meyer actually in his CFAC hot rod, the Ferrari 250 short wheelbase,
the John Van Noy car,
the silver one coming out, and I'm just like, oh my God, this is perfection. And I still, to this day, I can't imagine a scene that I've witnessed that's more perfect than that in the car world. That's a perfect car. So I agree with you, and I told them, I'm not strictly I like the concourse. I've enjoyed going to it for years. I like car shows, but I'm not just a concourse person. If you're looking for someone who's just a concourse guy, hardcore, you can find them. They're out there, but that's not me. And they said that's not what we want. This is not just a concourse anymore. It's a lifestyle event. It's a whole week, and we're looking for someone who's a true enthusiast, but also a business person who has experience in many different areas. And I said, all right, well, I guess we'll continue the meeting.
Well, you just answered a couple of my questions. So in one shot, but to back up a step, how did that meeting even happen? You're running a restoration shop. You live in Carmel. Obviously, you're sort of, it's a small world up there. But how does one?
So I had made friends with some executives at the Pebble Beach Company, and also in the concourse, and just in the car community in Monterey and Carmel. And, when you own a shop and you're dealing with, high-end collector cars, people find out quick. And people started coming to the shop and they started saying, look, we're looking for a new person to kind of carry on the concourse. And, we think you'd be a great choice. And, I said, no, I've got a shop I'm running here, and, I'm still a partner at the law firm. I don't really do active litigation, but I'm still, involved with that. And, I'm not a concourse guy. It's not for me. And, they kept coming around and said, well, we think it'd be good. And, the more, sometimes the person who doesn't want the job is usually the best one for it. And then, one day my wife, once again, the smarter one, she said, why are you so resistant to this? You go to all these events anyways, most of the people, the cars, how to run a business. Why don't you just sit down and talk with them and see what they have to say? And I said, all right, well, when you say it that way, all right. And so I sat down with them and I heard what they had to say and they heard what I had to say. And, the first thing I said is, look, I'm not Sandra Button. If you're looking for another Sandra, then, good luck, because she's, kind of hard to replicate. She's one of a kind,
right.
Yeah. But I'm not her. I do things in my own way, and I've got my own strengths. And they said, we're not looking for another Sandra. We're looking for someone who we think is going to be a great fit to kind of lead this into the new generation, right? And help to bring in new collectors and new and fresh energy. And they kind of said everything that I really wanted to hear, and I actually really liked and trusted the people that were involved, the people at the Pebble Beach Company. I know a lot of them. It's a great company, and its mission it really aligned with my personal mission. One of the things that I really wanted to do, I met someone early on in my life who gave me really good guidance and advice, and he said, if you're looking for a way to structure your life, I was a kid at the time, I was in high school, and he said, a really good way to structure it is you spend the first third of your life educating yourself, right? Get yourself a good foundation. Second third of your life, you spend applying that education, making money, establishing yourself, right? And freeing yourself from the economic chains that'll bind you and hold you down, right? And if you can finish that, then the last third of your life you should spend giving back to all the people that help you to get there, right?
Wow.
And to all the people that can't really help, and to give away everything you've had the good fortune of earning, so that when you're on your deathbed, you die broke, and that's a life well lived. And so I've followed that, and when I decided to end my time as a trial lawyer, I'd met those goals. I was very fortunate, and I told my wife, I want to do something where I'm giving back. It's really important to me. And when I was talking to the people at Pebble, they said the concourse is our largest fundraising event for the company, and one of the largest ones on the peninsula. We raised millions of dollars, and we give it to charities all throughout Monterey County that deal with children and education. And that's our main goal of the concourse. And when I heard that, then that's when I went all in. I said, great, this is perfect. I can do cars, I can be with the people that I love and I like hanging out with. I could be giving back and helping to raise money for charity. It's what more would you want in this act of life? I saw it. The restoration side of the shop was getting more difficult because of tariffs and because of shipping and because of visas. And it was just, everything kind of seemed to align at one point in time. And it was one of those things where, you're kind of at a crossroads. I was fortunate that the shop was paid off. I bought the building. I bought everything in it. I owned it. And so I didn't have to worry about, servicing debt and things like that. I was able to choose the cars I wanted to work on. And there was a lot of freedom there, right? But on the other side, I was offered this opportunity that had, significant pitfalls and dangers and unknowns. And as with many things in my life, you think, what do? Do you stay in the comfortable part and just keep doing what you're doing and perhaps not grow, but be safer? Or do you go to the other path, which is, fraught with a lot more potential downside, a lot more risk, but there's a lot more reward, and I'm not just talking about monetary reward. There's a lot of reward for people that, are unable to reward themselves, and so it was an easy call for me. My wife was behind me. So, so I took that fork in the road, and we scaled back the restoration shop. So we're not doing the full restorations anymore. I told my guys the ones that were from the U.S. that remained, I said, look, we can either close and we can find you other jobs elsewhere, or we can continue going and we can do, service work, we can do repair work, we can do paint jobs, we can do collection management, storage, buying and selling. And they said, absolutely, we want to stay with and we want to continue. So that's what we're doing. And the guys that went back to Italy were able to secure really good jobs back there with some really good shops, which was great. So it all ended up kind of working out well. Yeah.
I love that. And now as you transition, you step into a new role, what should we expect? I mean, I started going to Pebble, I think my first time was probably 30 years ago. I started going for work probably 20 years ago. And even in that time, I've seen Pebble change, but I've seen our community, our world, our industry, whatever word you want to use, the change has been dramatic. And certainly, and even Monterey, I mean, it used to be the races and Pebble, and then obviously Quail comes along, but now it's almost overwhelming. There's so much. And to anyone who says kids don't care about cars, I challenge you to go to Monterey on on Friday or Saturday and look at any street corner during car week and not get completely overwhelmed by 20-year-olds with SLRs. So how do you, as you kind of lay out this mission in front of you, how do you walk the line between preserving what made it great and also kind of accepting the challenge that it sounds like was asked of you by the Pebble Beach company, which is this sort of next generation conversation? How do you do that?
Yeah. So, I mean, these are questions they asked day one as well, and the first thing I said is, look, it's a Pebble Beach is an institution. When I say Pebble, I'm talking about the concourse. It's an institution. It's the premier concourse in the world. It has been for years. It's the pinnacle. It's the one that everyone wants to win. And so anyone who gets in there and they say, oh, well, I'm going to make this big change and that big change, and we're going to redo this, and, we're going to turn it into a rave, and we're going to have disco balls. And, that's not the person you want, No. It's a great event. And anyone that says they're going to do sweeping changes is the wrong person. They don't understand the event and they don't understand the automotive world. That being said, I told them, look, it's a living and breathing event, and it always has been. It's always had to do micro changes and adjustments in order to stay relevant and to remain something that people want to go to year after year, right? And to keep up with the times. So it's never been a static event. Never. Year after year, it's always changing, adding different classes, displaying them in different ways, changing up, adding the tour. So there's always going to have to be changes made to keep it relevant. And so what my job is to look and to kind of draw on not only my contacts and the people I know, but my experience in the car world to kind of portent the future, what's going to be happening 5 years and 10 years from now. And any leader of a company that you talk to, if they tell you that they focus on the now, right, and the yesterday, then they're you can see the results in their company. That's not going to be a company that's doing well, right? The leader of a company should be living his life 2 years, 3 years, 5 years ahead. That's your job. Your job is to live in the future.
You're the visionary.
Yeah. That's your job. And so my job is to kind of look at trends, look at headwinds, and figure out how we're going to deal with them, right?
What do you think Pebble looks like 5 years from now?
I think it looks largely the same in terms of appearance, because I think it's incredibly important to maintain the history of the event, right? There's a reason why I collect books and automotive art and posters and signs and old parts, original ones, even if they're a little damaged. It's because they're important and they're part of the history of this car culture that we love. The Pebble Beach Concours is the exact same way. It's something that's, a wonderful event for so many people, and certain things about it should not be changed. There's always going to be the classic and antique cars on the field. There's always going to be the Packards and Duesenbergs and Rolls Royces, and it's always going to be a garden party type of an event. It's always going to have judges and be, one of the more formal concourses. Changes are going to include letting in newer cars, right? And letting in cars that are that the youth are attracted to, that maybe you and I don't understand because we didn't grow up with them, and they're made of different materials than the cars that we enjoy were made of. But this isn't something new. This is something that happened when the brass era cars ended, and the pre-war and the post-war, and it's been happening for generations and generations. And we need to continue doing that, because I think kids do like cars. They like them even more when they can see them and experience them.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also have to compliment the Pebble team. I think there have been changes over the years, like, adding Justin Bell and the Torque guys doing kind of their live cast. What the team does with social media, having kind of live. I mean, there have been multiple occasions over the last few years where I've been there with a major concours sponsor in their tent, and I'm actually having an easier time following what's happening on the stage, watching the broadcast, because there's color commentary and I can hear it in my ear. And, so I think adding that level of sort of technology and context, which is hard. I mean, it's really a Pebble and Goodwood. There's only a few groups that are doing it like that. And
it's difficult, but if you think about it, it's a live event. You only get one chance to do it. And where's another area where you do that? When you do a trial and you're ready to get up there on stage and put on your case, you get one chance to do one chance. And you better be prepared. So, in terms of, having experience with live things, it's something I've done for many years. And I think that's one of the special parts of this concourse is the live production. You kind of get little glimpses of magic that you don't get when someone's really, prepackaged.
Love it. Well, Vince, you've been very generous with your time. I have two questions left as we kind of wrap this up.
Yeah.
The first is, knowing that you've been a part of Pebble in a variety of ways, as an attendee, as a restorer, as a person showing a car, and now obviously in a leadership role. If someone is coming this year for the first time, either as an attendee just to walk on the field, or if they're showing a car for the first time, what advice would you give them to best experience, Pebble, Car Week, the whole thing?
Put down the phone. Put down the phone and just enjoy it. Take it all in, Shut off the phone, put it in your back pocket. There's going to be photos all over the internet of every single car from every single angle, I mean, take a couple photos, with your friends or whatever. But, a lot of people go through and they're videotaping and photographing the entire place. And I think it kind of takes away from the experience, right? That'd be my best advice, because there's so many important people there. People from all over the car world and titans of industry, and they're all there to have fun. And interacting with people on the show field is one of my favorite things to do. And you can't do that if you're on your phone, So my advice would be put away the phone.
I did not expect that. That is really good advice. I like it. So last question, this is one I ask all of our guests. It's at least well known with our audience that I unfortunately, the only way I learn is by usually just like diving in and trying things and screwing them up and then learning from it. And so my sort of mantra is make every mistake once. So kind of a question we always like to ask leaders is, as you think back on your career, what is sort of the biggest mistake you made and what did you learn from it?
Biggest mistake, I think, ended up being one of my biggest successes, actually. And this, kind of goes back to one of my themes, which is you always push hard. You figure things out. You don't back off when things get difficult. And you figure out ways to make, lemonade from lemons. I was a young trial lawyer, and then the cases that we do, they were contingent fee cases. So, we'd put all the money into the case. And if we are not successful, then we don't get paid. And we lose all the money we put into the case, right? So I was a young lawyer, and we had this case involving a public school, right? At the time, there were immunities for public schools where you couldn't sue them, right? Because they said it's for the public good and you're not allowed to sue them. It's not in the scope of work for a teacher to abuse. It's outside of their scope of work. So therefore the school is not responsible. And I said, this isn't right. I don't like this whole, 30-year history of legislation and of case law on the issue. It's wrong. And so I told the partners that, let's take this case, and it's involving a counselor, and she was there to help kids and to protect them, and she abused them. And, so maybe we can just change the framework. So we're suing the school because they didn't supervise and train her properly, right? Which is in the scope of their employment.
Right.
So we do this case, and we had a couple $100,000 into it, and judge dismisses it, which is, it's a big problem when you're a young lawyer, you're an associate, and, you just lose the firm $250,000, $300,000. And the partners say, what happened? And I said, look, I'm telling you, this legal theory is solid. The judge has it wrong. The judge is looking at the perp, the one who did it. I'm looking at the people who are supposed to supervise her. That's in the scope of their duties. They violated. They were negligent. Let's appeal it. They said, all right, so we appeal it. I prep all the papers, deal with some appellate lawyers. We go, argue the case, and we lose again, 2-1.
Oh. 2
judges ruled against us, but the one who was for us was the presiding judge. And he wrote a 15-page opinion why I was right? So, we applied for certiorari to the Supreme Court, which they don't accept everything. They need something to, and so this opinion allowed the Supreme Court to say, yeah, this is an important case. It affects thousands, hundreds of thousands of kids all throughout the state that are in public schools. Let's take this case up. So spend more money, convince them, went to the Supreme Court, and we won a unanimous decision, And so that case set the law for all the kids in every single public entity all throughout California, and it allowed them to hold their abusers accountable if they're abused. That changed the law. And so my biggest mistake of my career up until that point ended up being my biggest success, because this is something that stands to this day. It's a C.A. Doe opinion. Everyone knows it who practices in this area of law, and it's because I said, let's continue this. I know I'm right. You just, might cost a little more money and take a little more time, but we're going to get there. And, we ended up, being very successful, and I became a partner largely because of that.
Wow. That's an incredible story. So stick to your guns.
Yeah. Stick to your guns and work hard and use your brain and don't give up. And don't be afraid to take risks. That's how you get somewhere in life.
I love it. Vince, this has been a great conversation. Where can people learn more about you and about the Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegance and follow everything that's coming up with the 75th anniversary? Sure. So pebblebeachconcours.net is where you can find everything related to the Pebble Beach Concours. We have an Instagram page as well. If you want to find out more about me, you can just Google me, or you can go to Finaldi Inc., which is our car company, and you can find more about it there. Excellent. Vince Finaldi, thank you so much for coming on Only the Strong Survive. To everyone listening, thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave a review. We read every single one. I'm Dan Kahn. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.